Maggots are a deadly bait during the winter months, and especially on the commercial fisheries. I'm here today to give you my top tips and tricks to try and help you put more fish in your net. Location is a really important thing when you come to choosing your swims. Today I've opted for 3 swims. The reason for this is there's not real much depth change in the peg, so I've just picked a line further out my peg in case it's hard, and then 2 positive lines, all in the deeper water. There's only really a depth change of about 2 inches on this peg, so it's all sort of deep water fishing. It's pretty uniform all the way across the lake. One's off the edge of the weed bed to the right, one off the weed bed to the left, and then hopefully I've got 3 lines that I can pick fish off, rest them and move about throughout the day. So starting off the session, I'm going to start on that longer line just because I feel like fishing further away from myself is going to get me bites a little bit quicker. I fished this peg recently on the Drennan Pole Champs and I had a really good festival, managed to win it on the last day off this peg actually. So obviously I know the peg, I know how it sort of responds, and you don't need to feed a great deal of bait, and that's because it's not very deep. So today, just under 4 foot, I've actually got my medium guru pot on with a sprinkle lid. And what that allows me to do is just tap in sort of 10 maggots at a time, and I'll feel my way in. If I'm getting bitted out, catching little roach, stuff like that, then I'll start upping my bait a little bit. But what you've got to be careful of in shallow pegs is if you put too much bait in, you can end up waiting too long for bites. The fish will be there, you'll see activity blowing, stuff like that, and you'll just wait longer for bites. So all the time, 8 or 10 maggots every couple of minutes or so, and then with my little sprinkle pot on, what I've done with this is just take the holes at the bottom so the maggots can't crawl out. I'm just going to lift my pot and just start to tap my pot, and then I'll almost count my maggots in. So when I think, right, there's 10 maggots, I'll lift my rig up and I'm manually going to lower this in now. So lower it down nice and slowly. That's just trying to catch the fish's eyes and putting my rig in. Now, if it weren't windy, it doesn't look windy on the video probably, it's flat calm, it's a very sheltered peg today, but I've got this horrible surface skim, and if I was trying to lay my rig in, what would happen is it'd probably be drifting my float a bit. So I've got 2 rigs set up, one's got a bulk and 2 droppers, and one's strung out. So I'm starting on the bulk and 2 droppers, just in case there's any nuisance fish about. Once I decide whether there is or there isn't, then what I'll do is maybe try that slightly lighter rig in a bit. So I'm just going to lay that rig in. I've fed 10 maggots and see what sort of response I get. Normally, if you drop on the right line, this time of year, there's an indication, you can get quite a quick response quite fast by feeding very little bait. If I'd have started short, I'd have probably had to wait that little bit longer. So I'm going towards where the fish are. I want to say it's bottom of the slope. There isn't really a slope on this peg. It changes by about an inch or 2 and that is it. But it does just start to come up there. So I'm still in the siltiest part of the lake, and a lot of people will be put off by that. And in the summer months, rightly so, because in the summer months, the fish will blow the bottom and stuff like that. So a little roach. Take him off. Now if I keep catching little fish like that, obviously we've only just started the session, so I'm not too fussed about that. It's the start of the session. You know, I'm going to play it by ear. What I don't want to do is start feeding too much bait too quickly. So I'm just going to top them maggots up that was in my pot. Now this is a break in play, if you like. I've got a chance to feed here without trying to hold my pole in the wind. So before I ship back out, again I'm just going to give it 10 maggots there, 10 maggots down that side. Now it looks like I'm fishing in the edge to the right there, but I'm actually still in the deep water. So this horrible skitty wind's just come back now, so feed me maggots, probably like 10 or 12, lift that rig up, hold it down, just lower it in position. Now if I constantly keep catching these little silvers, that's when I've got to think about how much bait to put in. Sometimes once the F1s arrive, you can go back to feeding 10 maggots again, but If I'm tapping 10 in and I'm just catching roach after roach after roach, then I need to do something and change my feeding. So then I might change my pot lid, put like 20, 25 maggots in the pot, dump them in one go, and hopefully it's enough bait then to sort of give the F1s time to find it and push the roach out. Because once the F1s sort of come in the area, all your silverfish bites will stop. You know, once they're in that area, the roach don't like it, they'll back off, and then all of a sudden you can sit and be a little bit more patient. When it comes to plumbing up, you want to make sure that you don't have too much line on the bottom. And too much line on the bottom means that your bites take ages to develop. The fish are very sort of finicky feeding at this time of the year as well. So, you know, if you have 5 or 6 inch on the bottom, for example, you're not going to show up all your bites. So for me, I like to have about 1 inch on the bottom, which is normally about the bottom of the body of the float. That's a good starting point. If it gets a little bit windier, I won't hesitate to put 2 inches on the bottom and move it up another inch. But that for me is about the maximum I want to have on the bottom. Now, when it comes to how often you should feed, it all depends on how well the lake's fishing. If it's fishing really well, you're obviously going to have to feed that little bit quicker. So again, another little silver. Another little roach. So this time, I've had 2 roach in first few drops. Just going to put a little bit more bait in. So get rid of that pot. Take my other pot that's got an open top lid, just so I can dump my maggots a little bit quicker. This time I'm going to put about 3/4 of a medium guru, which is about 20-25 maggots. Just see if it's a little bit more bait, just give the time for the F1s to find it. So I'll get to my marker. First thing I do, tap all them maggots in one go. Let me rig straighten out and then lower it on that little spot. Now I could do this for maybe 2 or 3 chucks, and then the bites will maybe slow down. A few F1s might turn up in the peg. I can always go back to feeding 10 maggots. I'm not disregarding that, but at the moment I feel like if I keep tapping 10 maggots in, I'm just going to catch little roach. Obviously it's the start of the session, and you know, you've got to give time for your peg to build up and the fish to find your bait as well as. But you don't want to sit there just doing the same thing and getting the same response. Like, be thinking about how you can drag them fish into your peg a little bit quicker, and then once they're there, think about how you can catch them a little bit quicker. Well, if you feed less bait, in theory, your hook bait will get picked up quicker. So you're always looking for that quicker response. So if I start catching now, feeding 20 maggots, 30 maggots, whatever the volume of maggots may be, I ain't just going to think, right, that's it, that's the feeding pattern for the day, because it'll change depending on how many fish are in your peg. So this time now, I'm just waiting that little bit longer. I had that first indication, which could have been a smaller fish, but hopefully that little bit extra bait just put them off a little bit, and we might get a chance of catching an F1. If we don't, we'll just do the same thing, a little bit more bait until we feel like there's some F1s in the area. Feeding is the main aspect of any style of fishing, and it's no different with this. How much you feed is very important, and it all depends on the depth of your peg really. The shallower it is, the less you tend to feed. You can get away with feeding less as well because you get that response a little bit quicker. When it's deeper water, you tend to have to be a little bit more aggressive, feed a little bit more bait. Today I've got around about 4 foot of water, so in my past experience, I generally find 10 to 20 maggots is about the average. If I can feed 10 and get a bite, fine, I'll feed as little as I can possibly get away with. But some days, you know, you might catch little silverfish that you don't want to be catching, and you have to put a little bit more bait in to make sure you can feed them off and get through to the better stamp fish. So we'll work it out on the day. It all depends how well the lake actually fishes, but that's one thing that I've really got to look into and try and work out as quickly as possible how much to feed, how often. Well, that again, it dictates by how the fish are feeding. In general, I don't like to be sat there doing nothing. I like to feed less bait, but more often. So, for example, I'd rather put 10 maggots in every 2 minutes rather than just dump 50 maggots in every 10 minutes. One of the biggest things I've got to stress when doing this style of fishing is you've got to keep feeding, even if you're not catching. The fish will not turn up unless you keep feeding your pegs. So I can tell here now, my peg's starting to change. Initially, you've gone in, you've had a few silverfish bites. I've put a little bit more bait in. That seems to sort of slow it down, get rid of them. Eventually the F1s find your bait, take over that little area, and then the silverfish back off. So I'm still getting an odd silverfish bite. You're still going to catch an odd one in between, but I'm hoping now I've got enough bait in that little spot where if there is any F1s in the area, they've got something to come to. The amount of times I've had it on these type of fisheries where it's roach, or little skimmers or whatever it may be, and then it stops. And then all of a sudden, the F1s or the carp, they turn up and it's just different. So now that I'm starting to get some fish in my peg, the next thing I've got to think about is how do I get a bite as quickly as possible. So is it feeding 10 maggots? Is it feeding 30? That time I probably put like 15 or 20 maggots in. So not this one. 15 or 20 maggots in. I've had a little indication and then I've caught him reasonably quickly. If you're waiting too long, if you feel like there's fish there and then you're waiting too long, you're probably putting too much bait in. So mix it up. Don't just think that 20 maggots is going to be the answer to everything all day long, because when there's a lot of fish in your peg, you'll be able to catch them quicker by feeding a little bit less sometimes. But then that's not going to last forever, so you've got to mix it up. Let's unhook this one, so I'm smacking the top lip. Nice F1, standard tunnel sort of size, probably £2. Just fishing that double maggot. So this time, I'm going to probably put half a pot in, which is probably about, again, 15 or 20 maggots. Keep them 2 lines fed. The ducks are eating a few of them down that right hand side, so I might end up throwing a few more in just to account for the fact that the ducks are probably eating 10 of them. Now these 2 lines, these are my feeding lines. If I'm going to do really well, if I was in a match situation, I'm going to do well, I want to be catching them out of my hand close to myself if I can. I'm still in the deeper water, so it's still 4 foot there. It's the exact same depth as where I'm fishing. The reason I've chose this line is just because I'm further away from myself, and hopefully they'll come to that line a little bit quicker, and then later in the day when the light starts to fade and the fish gaining confidence, hopefully these 2 lines can come good as well. But for now, this is how I'd sort of like hope that it'd go. You know, fed it a bit, got bitted out, didn't look great, but by persevering, keeping bait going through, all of a sudden now I'm starting to catch fish pretty steady. Now, I would never change and come off this line while it's like this. Once it's good, you just want to keep putting fish in the net. And if I can leave these 2 lines short for as long as possible, what I can do then is build up the confidence of the fish, keep catching fish off that line. If that line then goes funny, you might think, well, how are you going to feed it when you come off it? Because you can't throw the bait. All I'll do is pick up my catapult and I can just loose feed that line. So say I was coming off this line now to have a look short, say I'm 2 hours into a match, I can feed that line with 10 or 15 maggots, just catapult a few maggots on it, just the same as I'm priming these 2 lines. Not feeding loads of bait, but by feeding regular, I can keep 3 lines on the go now. So for the time being, I'm going to stick with this. I don't feel like there's any need to change. I'm catching fish on it. But if I did come off it, that's how I'd continue to keep that line going. And then these 2 lines are going to be for sort of the afternoon or the later part of the day if you're fishing in a match. And hopefully that's where you're going to do most of your damage and hopefully catch some better stamp fish as well as. Hookbait options, I tried to keep it really simple, match the hatch. If I'm feeding maggots, I fish maggots on the hook, simple as that. So single, double maggot. I don't tend to use 3 maggots. I do a lot again when it's warmer, but this time of year, I try and keep my bait as small as possible so the fish can suck it in as easily as possible. Single maggot sometimes don't stand out enough and you have to fish double maggot. But if you foul looking fish, sometimes it's because your bait's too big and single maggot can be good. So play about with it, try single, try double. The biggest thing I would say is match your hook to suit the size of your hook bait. So for a single maggot, I use a 20s F1 maggot. For double maggot, I use an 18s F1 maggot. Now, a good little tip if you're fishing at distance is to dunk your pot under the water. That'll stop your maggots from bouncing out. Obviously, your maggots will be dry, they'll bounce out of your pot because your hole's quite big. So all I do, put the pot under the water and just push it in one motion. And on these pots, they've got little drainage holes, so it'll drain the water off. You've not got loads of water in your pot. And then I can go out there and I can empty my pot without the risk of spilling my maggots. Just before I ship out, I always like to feed these lines. You know, it's just the best time to feed them. You're not trying to hold your pole still and all the rest of it. I'll get to where I'm going. I've got a little bit of white tape there on my pole. Turn my pot round, give it a couple of little bangs. My maggots come out. I can just lift that rig back up, let it straighten. And all I'm doing this for is just to allow the fish to see my hook bait. And I can drop that last little bit in. And if there's any fish there now, because I've lowered my hook bait down reasonably slow, I've given them a chance of seeing it, they might pick it up that little bit quicker. If you just drop it in and then feed your bait on top of it, without really paying attention to your rig, you're not giving them the chance to see it, so therefore you're not going to get that quick bite. You've then got to wait for the fish to go and rummage through the rest of the maggots and find your hook bait. But if they see it falling, it just encourages them to sort of pick it up that little bit quicker. So again, pay attention to that. Now I've had a really good run on this line, but this one has just took probably 5 or 6 minutes to catch. I'm waiting quite a while, and I think that's because I'm just potting the bait. You know, I've built that sort of area up, but because we've had such a good run on it, my peg is now starting to slow. Now, if you're doing really well, there's no need to come off it, but I feel like because I've been priming these lines for so long now, if I move on to one of these lines, I'm going to catch a little bit quicker than what I am fishing out there. Right, let's have a little look on this inside then. I'm going to keep priming that long line because if I don't catch down this inside, if it's a little bit early or for whatever reason they're not coming in, we can always go back out there because we can catch there. But the reason I like to have 3 lines like this is so that I can bounce the fish off it. So we put like 15 or 20 maggots in. Because it's the same depth as out there, hopefully a similar feeding pattern should occur. You know, you're fishing in a similar depth, similar fish. You know, we might get a few better stamp fish fishing closer to the bank, but realistically we'll probably be catching the same fish throughout our peg. So it's not like we need to feed any heavier because we're trying to target bigger fish or, you know, the different. It's just the same sort of principle. Fishing in 4 foot of water, for the amount of bites you're getting, 15 or 20 maggots seems about right today. Now, that line was good early doors and then it started to slow up. I've been priming these 2 inside lines for some time now. What I'm looking for here is for it to be quicker. If it's not quicker, it's pointless fishing here. Like, I'm trying to speed up my catch rate. When they come on these 2 lines, they're going to come here because they want to have a feed. So it can be a later on in the day sort of job. But also, if we can get these lines going and bounce fish off each line, then all of a sudden we can pick up our catch rate as well. So it took about 5 or 6 minutes to catch that last fish, which is still not bad, but I could see the peg fading. I could tell it needed a rest. You know, it tends to happen where you just have one line, you'll exhaust it, and it's just never going to last for a full 5 hours. So a telltale sign is that you start foul hooking fish as well. As you start to thin your peg out, you start to foul hook an odd fish. We haven't actually foul hooked any on that line, but I could just tell my bite time we're getting longer. So a little bit of a rest, see what happens down here. If this side doesn't go, we've also got this other side. So keep priming that, because even though this looks the best swim, the fish could be coming from, I have a bridge to my left there, the fish could be coming from that side of my peg rather than this side of my peg. So it might be better, even though we're fishing into the wind slightly, that side might actually be better. Last time I was on this peg, I did actually catch a few fish here off the edge of this reed bed, so I'm expecting this line to produce an odd fish. You'd think it would with a natural cover. It's first chuck down there as well. I've been loose feeding bait. Sometimes what can happen is when you're loose feeding it and not fishing it, when you first go on it, you've just got to tighten your bait back up with that pot. You know, it's a good way of drawing fish in, but I could have a bit more bait there than what I think I have. So it might take a couple of feeds with the pot just to tighten everything back up, get them fish coming back to that same spot, and then my bite might start to come a little bit quicker. Well, I don't feel a massive fish, but it was quicker than 6 minutes. It's only a stocky, I think. Yeah, little ghost F1. Just popped out in the net. Nice little ghost F1, probably 12 ounce. Colour of bait's really important for me, not just with maggots, but with any bait. But maggots in particular, when I'm doing sort of my winter fishing and the water goes that little bit clearer, I find that red maggots don't stand out on the bottom as much, and that's a good thing because it leads to less foul look fish. So for me, I always like to use red maggots when the water's that little bit clearer. If you go to a lake that's really coloured, I'd probably use a mixture of red and whites, and then in the summer month I tend to just use whites. But when it comes to this time of the year, for me, reds are best by a mile. Now I'm predominantly fishing double maggot, but you could try single. You know, when the winter really kicks in, sets in, it gets really, really cold, single can be a great upbait. Like I say, I'll probably scale my hook down slightly to a 20s for that if I was doing that. At the minute, I'm still feeding sort of enough maggots where I feel like I need to be fishing double. Plus there's been a few roach problems. So once I've fed that now, I'll just pick my catapult up, 15 maggots, keep that line primed, and now I'm keeping all these 3 lines on the go. Sometimes you'll find that one side or one line won't be as good as the others. You know, let's take, for example, it's this line or that line. What I'll do then is I'll just, towards the later stage, if I'm match fishing, for example, I'll cut my worst line out and I'll just concentrate on the 2. But for the first 3 hours of the match sort of thing, say it's a 5-hour match, first 3 hours, they could turn up there all of a sudden with 2 hours to go. But once I've sort of figured out, right, there's no bites to be had on this line or that line or whatever it may be, I'll look to sack one. So I'll start off with 3, but I nearly always finish my match with 2. You know, you want to be fishing your strongest line and then have a backup. It's no good sort of rotating between 3. You need to sort of do, towards the end of the day when they start to feed, you should be looking to sort of get a real good run off one line in particular and then have a backup plan. At the moment, I don't know which side the fish are going to be coming from. Could be better to my left, could be better to my right. I'm catching a few out long. As it gets colder, what you might find yourself doing is changing your pattern a little bit. You might have 2 longer lines and 1 short line. So it all depends on the weight you're fishing for. You know, recent matches, you've needed over £100 to win on this venue. So I'm feeling like you're still going to need to get a lot of bites. So that's why I've opted for 2 short lines and a longer line. But as it goes colder, if £50 only going to win the match, or the fishing's getting a little bit harder, then you might want 2 long lines because you're going to get bites more often than not fishing further away from yourself. And then have 1 really positive line. When I say positive line, you're not feeding it anymore differently. It's just, you know, as it gets colder, they might not turn up short until the last sort of hour of the match. So I've just had 2 little indications there. I don't know if they're small fish or slightly bigger fish, but 2 signs this chuck, which is, if they're F1s, it's a good sign because it shows there's a few fish down there. So what you might find is sometimes when you're trying to draw new fishing, just potting bait is not enough. Sometimes you need to loose feed a few as well. So by fishing close, you can be a little bit more accurate with your loose feed. And it might be a case today where I need to feed some bait hook a fish and just throw a few in to make a bit of noise and attract new fish. It's amazing how many times you just throw a bit of bait in and it sparks a response. I'm just going to try it now, see if it gets me anything. So I'm just going to throw 8 or 10 maggots twice. Ducks are going a bit nuts on it, but the fish are used to that. So an odd maggot hitting the water, an odd maggot falling through. Sometimes it'll just spark a response. It's amazing how many times you'll sit there, nothing, and you loose feed a few or you throw a few and your float will go under within a minute. So I've got 2 rigs today to cover the same swims. The only thing difference really is the shotting pattern and it's slightly different weight float. So I'll start at the top. I've got pink hydro elastic. Really important that you don't fish too heavy elastic. When you're fishing fine wire hooks, the reason you're doing that is because you want a lightweight hook so you can get more bites. If you fish a heavy elastic, you're going to end up opening the hooks because they're not designed for fishing with heavy elastic. So balancing your rig is very, very crucial. So pink hydro elastic. I've got my little reverse bead connection. Even though I'm not fishing shallow, which I think that's great for, I still use it for fishing on the deck as well. Main line is 015 N-gauge, and then I've got 2 number 9 cubes. Them back shots there are just to help any surface skim and allow my float to settle nicely. I can put them on the water as my rig's settling, and it'll help keep that line from drifting and dancing about in the wind, which will just make your float not behave natural. The first rig I'm going to talk you through is 0.3 of a gram. It's carbon in stem, and it's got a 1.5mm bristle. It's the F1 slim. And then coming down the actual rig, 5 number 9s as a bulk, and then moving down I've got 1 number 10 dropper, another number 10 dropper, so 2 droppers, bulk and 2 droppers, 5-inch hook length. The material that is N-gauge Supernatural in 010, and then finishing it off I've got an 18s F1 maggot because I plan on fishing double maggot mainly. If I was fishing a single maggot I'd probably swap that to a 20s. And then the other rig is exactly the same in terms of line, so pink hydro elastic, 015 N-gauge, 2 number 9 cubes. The float's slightly lighter, 0.25 of a gram. Again, carbon slim. I've got 1 little number 10 underneath the float, just to get the float cocking and going. And then I've got 6 number 10s strung out. So these are in a tapered fashion. What I mean by that is they're close together here and they slowly get further apart. And hopefully it'll give me a nice fall into the swim. I'm not trying to catch the fish on the drop here. What I'm trying to do is get my rig to fall slow and natural. And what might happen there is the fish see the bait, it falls through, and they grab it a little bit quicker because it's caught their eye. So hook length wise, again, N-gauge Supernatural in 010 to an 18s F1 maggot, again, because I'm predominantly going to be fishing double maggot, hopefully. But this rig is just a slightly slower on the fall rig. Right, I'm not happy with that line. I've been there 10 minutes, I'm not getting signs. I'm going to go back out on that long line that I've been priming. Some days they won't come there, you know, sometimes it's a little bit too cool, doesn't feel right. I should have dropped in there, even though I've had the one there, I should have dropped in and probably caught a little bit quicker. So I'll keep feeding them, but it could be one of them days where I maybe needed 2 longer lines and 1 short line. I've gone for 2 shorter lines and 1 long line, and maybe the fish are just backing away a little bit. You know, it doesn't help when you're pleasure fishing in the cooler months. The fish will definitely back off, but this line has been quite good. And to say how good this line's been, you'd think the same depth, a weed bed there, that line would be good, but sometimes the distance you fish is really important. So I could have picked 2 lines at this distance, left and right, and 1 short line in front of me. That could have been an option. I still would have had 3 lines some way or another, but 2 short lines today, if they're not going to turn up on that line, I've not had a bite when I've had a look this side. 2 lines short probably could have been the wrong thing. 1 line, and you might catch their last 40 minutes. This particular line now has been my strongest line, but the problem I might have a little bit today is when this line stops, I'm not going to get bites short. So it's very important that you pick the right parts of your peg to feed. See there, I think that just shows Like, I'm fishing in that edge and I can't get bites. Same depth, same feeding, everything's identical. But where you choose to fish in your peg's important. You know, the distance I'm choosing to fish. Obviously today, the water's clear, the cameras are here. They probably don't want to come as close, but I can still get bites on that line. I do feel like if I was sat here on my own, being quiet, I'd probably be able to be catching on both these lines. But as it goes colder, you've definitely just got to think about where you put them lines. You know, if I was coming back here tomorrow on a match, I'd play it on the side of caution. I'd have 2 longer lines and 1 short line, just because my longer lines have been better. You know, and it doesn't matter whether you're fishing an open water lake or a snake lake, the same principle applies. Like, if you can catch more fish at 13, 14 metres than you can fishing at 5 metres, you know, put 2 lines at 13, 14 metres. Today, I felt like there'd have been a lot of fish quite close because the weights have been good, but, you know, disturbance, things like that, they all have an effect on the fish. I think the biggest thing you can take away from today is definitely like where you choose to pick the lines. You know, it's having 3 lines and rotating them is good if you pick the right lines. Like, the fish feel confident on this longer line, fishing a little bit further away from myself. These 2 short lines haven't been as good. So if I come back tomorrow, I definitely think about having, you know, 2 longer lines at this sort of distance and 1 short line, just because I've had more bites on that. One of my favourite sayings is that the fish will tell you what's happening. You know, they'll tell you what you should be doing. And obviously, with this line producing more bites, it's telling me I should be fishing longer, not shorter. Therefore, you know, I could probably open a new line. If it was earlier in the day, I'd probably open a new line further there. But I still feel like there's some bites to be had short as the light starts to fade later in the day. Like, they're really confident there now, getting bites nice and steady. My catch rate's back to probably a fish every 3, 4, 5 minutes. You know, we're ticking along nicely. The stamp's decent. It's just nice to give yourself options and have them multiple swims, but you've got to put them in the right spot. In hindsight, looking back, I think I got them short lines not wrong, they just didn't work for me, but the long line was really good, so maybe I should have had 2 long lines and 1 short line. But I guarantee if you put them tips and tricks that I've shown you today into practice, you will put more fish in your net next time you get out on the bank.